They left me, right there, at the winter gala, heels sinking in the snow, coatless with no ride home and no explanation, not a call, not a glance back, just silence and taillights disappearing into the cold. Hi, I'm Lena, and that night was supposed to be a celebration. But instead, it was the night I realized my family had erased me, and the night a stranger stepped out of the woods to change everything. What happened next wasn't magic, but it felt like a quiet kind of rescue. If you've ever felt invisible, this story might just remind you that you were never alone. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. They said I should feel lucky just to be invited. Not in those exact words, of course, but it was there. In the way my mother, Diana, checked my dress twice before we left the house, then offered me a shawl that didn't match but covered most of the neckline. It's a formal event, she reminded me, not an expressionist gallery. I said nothing. I'd learned silence buys you time, sometimes even peace. The Briarview Hotel glittered like a snow globe turned upside down. It was the kind of place where everyone smiled too widely and drank from glasses they didn't finish. White lights wrapped the banisters. A string quartet played something elegant I couldn't name. I stood just inside the entrance, pressing my fingers together to stop the nervous tapping. My sister Caroline floated past me in ivory heels and a dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. She looked like someone who belonged here. I looked like someone trying not to spill cider on borrowed shoes. We were barely 10 minutes in before the comments started. Is that the lipstick I bought you? It reads darker in this lighting. Caroline didn't wait for an answer. Diana followed a step behind, glancing over her shoulder. Try not to be a distraction tonight, she said. I thought she meant my dress. Photos came next. The foundation board lined up for a group shot, spouses clustered around the edges. I stood off to the side, waiting to be told where to stand. When I finally stepped in, the photographer hesitated. Diana waved her hand. Let's just keep it simple, she said, already smiling toward the flash. I wandered through the ballroom, weaving between tall arrangements of lilies and empty chairs. The place smelled of candle wax and something citrusy. A waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres I didn't recognize. I took one anyway, mostly to keep my hands busy. During the keynote speech, I stepped outside for air. The cold wrapped around my shoulders like a question I hadn't asked. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and slow, like it was trying not to interrupt. I leaned against a pillar, watching my breath disappear. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. When I turned back toward the entrance, I noticed something off. The family car, our black Lincoln, wasn't where it had been. I walked to the valet stand, clutching my wrap tighter. The young man barely looked up. Whitmore? I asked. Did they already leave? He blinked, checked the clipboard. Sorry, there's no Whitmore on the guest list. Must have already cleared. I waited. Maybe he'd laugh. Maybe someone would run back outside and shout my name. But no one did. My phone buzzed once in my clutch, then died. I hadn't charged it past 20%. I stood there, coatless, heels sinking slightly into snow-melted concrete. Behind me, the music inside swelled. Through the frosted glass, I could still see people dancing. Emily passed near the window, plate in hand. She didn't look out. No message, no call. Just an absence sharp enough to leave a mark. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I just stood very still, letting the silence press in around me. Their car was gone, their seats were warm, and I was left with a half-finished flute of cider, a shawl too thin for December, and the sinking realization that nobody would be circling back. I wasn't ready to go home. I wasn't even sure I had one anymore. I kept walking long after the last window light disappeared behind me. The sound of my steps softened as the town faded. Even the hum of passing cars gave way to a deeper stillness. Snow whispered beneath my heels, but the cold said louder things. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. Dad used to say, if you feel invisible, go where no one's watching. You'll find yourself faster. It was the kind of advice that made more sense when he was around to say it. Now it sounded like an echo that followed me through the trees. The road narrowed into gravel, then into packed dirt laced with frozen leaves. I passed a rusted sign that might have once marked a trail. My dress clung to my knees like a regret. Each breath stung more than the last. I tried to focus on my steps, but the ache in my ankle made its own rhythm, sharp and uneven. Somewhere between two crooked pines, my heel caught on a root. I pitched forward, catching myself with one hand before my legs gave out entirely. The snow bit into my palms. I rolled to my side, ankle pulsing like it had its own heartbeat. I didn't scream. I didn't have the strength to. For a moment, I let my eyes close. The cold crept under the edge of my borrowed shawl, curling into my spine. Maybe if I stayed still long enough, the woods would forget I was there. Maybe that was the plan all along. Then I heard it. A single footstep. Deliberate. Not the crunch of a squirrel or the scatter of wind, but weight. Human. I froze. Another step followed. Then stillness. I opened my eyes. At first, I saw nothing. Then, between the trees, a figure emerged. Tall, hooded, layered in dark fabric. No flashlight, no words, just presence. He stepped closer, slowly, then knelt down about 6 feet away. His movement was careful, like he didn't want to startle me. From his pack, he pulled a plastic water bottle and set it within reach, then a granola bar, unwrapped and still warm, from his pocket. He didn't look at me directly, just enough to see I was breathing. When I didn't move, he shrugged off his jacket, a thick flannel-lined thing, and draped it gently over my shoulders. I flinched at the touch, but not from fear, from surprise. It had been a long time since someone handed me something without expecting it back. He turned, gathered a few dry branches, and with practiced motions, struck a small fire. The flame caught low, casting orange on the snow. He didn't sit too close, just enough to keep me in its warmth. That's when I saw it, his left wrist as he reached for more wood. A faint half-moon scar just above the cuff. I'd seen that mark before, back in sophomore year art class. Ash L. Quiet barely spoke, but he once asked me why I always drew willow trees. I told him they looked like they were trying not to fall apart. I wanted to say something, to ask if it was him, but my throat felt scraped raw by the cold. Words sat heavy in my chest, too tired to climb out. As I shifted under the coat, something poked against my hip. I reached down and found a folded scrap of paper tucked near my bag. My handwriting, a piece from an old journal entry, torn at the edge but clean, like it had been handled carefully. On the back, someone had written in neat block letters, "You're not crazy. They just weren't listening." I stared at it, not blinking. This wasn't lost. It was delivered. I wasn't just being helped. I was being remembered. Morning came slow, not with warmth, but with light that peeled away the dark. The trees around me stood like quiet witnesses, their branches stiff with frost. My breath fogged the air in thin bursts as I pulled the coat tighter, the granola bar long gone but still sitting heavy in my stomach, like a promise I didn't know how to trust. When I pushed myself up, my ankle screamed, but I bit down and kept moving. The snow crunched beneath each step, muffled but steady. I followed the trail, not of footprints, but of paper. The first page fluttered under a pine root. It was burned at the corner, but I recognized the sketch immediately. A willow tree, half drawn, ink bleeding slightly from old water damage. I'd drawn it at 15, hiding in the laundry room after Caroline told me I looked like a ghost with opinions. Another scrap waited at the base of a tree. A poem. My handwriting again, slanted and uneven. The lines were personal, ones I'd torn out of a notebook in embarrassment, convinced no one would ever understand them. And yet, here they were, intact, protected from the wind. Each piece led me further into the woods, not randomly, carefully, deliberately, like someone had mapped out a breadcrumb trail with pieces of my life. Eventually, the trees opened into a small clearing. At the far end stood what looked like an old ranger station, tucked beneath the weight of time and snow. The roof sagged slightly and the front window was smudged with years of dust, but the glass wasn't broken. Smoke curled from a small pipe near the back, faint like it didn't want to be caught trying too hard. I hesitated at the door, then pressed my hand against it. The wood gave way with a quiet groan. Inside, the air was warmer than expected, faintly smoky with the dry scent of cedar. The fire in the potbelly stove had mostly died down to embers, but the warmth still lingered in the walls. A single desk sat against the back window, its surface cluttered with scraps of paper, bits of charcoal, and a mug that had long gone cold. But what caught my attention wasn't any of that. It was the laptop. An old model, plastic edges dulled by time, but its screen glowed dimly. The solar charger in the window blinked green. On the desktop, a single tab was open. Basic Anonymous. I leaned closer. The blog was simple. No profile photo, no links, no distractions. Just post after post, dated across months, even years. And in each entry, there were words I knew. Not because I'd read them before, but because I'd written them. Old poems. Lines from private thoughts I'd never said aloud, sketches uploaded, somehow scanned. One entry quoted a birthday letter I wrote to myself at 16, one I never mailed, never even sealed. The header read, "She doesn't know yet, but she'll survive. I've seen her do it before." My hand trembled on the edge of the desk. Someone had been reading my life in real time, not mocking, not analyzing, just listening. Taped above the desk was another drawing, a willow tree again, this time rendered with charcoal and watercolor. My style, but not my hand. The tree's roots were exposed, reaching. I'd drawn a version of it once, then ripped it in half after Caroline called it overly sentimental. But here it was whole. Then I saw it. The title of the most recent post, dated the night of the gala. She was never broken. They just needed her to be. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. But something shifted. I didn't know who was writing. I didn't know how they got all of this. But I knew one thing. This wasn't pity. It was proof. The sidewalks were slushy, the kind of wet that seeped through your soles and made you feel like even the ground didn't want to hold you up. I walked with my head down, jacket buttoned to the chin, the coat still the same one from that night. Too big, too soft, borrowed from someone who never asked for it back. The air carried the kind of cold that wasn't bitter, just tired. A year had passed, but I still wasn't warm. I'd come into town looking for something simple, a place to charge my phone, a hot drink, somewhere I could sit without being watched or whispered about. Oak Ridge Hollow didn't look different, but I did. Maybe that's why the town didn't recognize me. I turned the corner by the post office and spotted the diner, Gibson's. We used to go there after church on Sundays. I could still picture the tan vinyl booths and that flickering neon open sign that never seemed to work right. It was working now, humming faintly in the window. Warmth fogged the glass. And then I saw them. Inside, at our usual booth, my mother, Diana, her hair pulled back into something elegant and sharp. Caroline, laughing over a coffee mug, her nails tapping the rim like a metronome of control. Greg sat across from them, flipping a menu, though he'd probably order the same thing he always did. 3 eggs, no toast, black coffee. Their coats were draped neatly over the back of the booth. No rush, no tension. Just comfort. A plate of fries sat in the middle of the table, half gone. A bottle of ketchup leaned against the salt shaker. My seat, the one by the window, was taken by someone I didn't recognize. A woman maybe in her late 20s, chatting politely. A coworker? A church friend? It didn't matter. She filled the space I used to hold. No one looked around. No one paused or checked the time. They weren't waiting for me. They weren't wondering. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching the scene like it was some kind of holiday postcard. My breath misted against the window. They looked happy, full, whole, just without me. Then Diana leaned toward the woman beside her and smiled. "That girl was always a handful," she said. I read her lips clearly through the glass. My chest tightened, but not with shock, with clarity. Caroline nodded, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a napkin. "So dramatic," she added. "She just couldn't let things go." Greg didn't say anything. He rarely did. Then Emily. She was at the far edge of the table, half turned toward the window. Her fork hovered mid-air when she noticed me. Our eyes locked. She froze, not in surprise, more like guilt finally catching up. She didn't wave, didn't stand, but her lips parted slightly and she mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." I stood there long enough for the cold to push through the seams of my coat. My fingers ached, but I didn't move. Inside, someone said something funny, and they all laughed. The window pane vibrated slightly with their joy. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't before. They hadn't lost me. They had removed me. Like pruning a branch they thought was growing the wrong way, like setting a table and choosing not to add another chair. They hadn't panicked, hadn't mourned, hadn't even paused. They had made room for a life where I didn't exist, and they were thriving. I took a step back. The snow crunched under my heel, steady and sure. For the first time in months, I didn't feel uncertain. I felt awake. I didn't feel abandoned anymore. I felt erased, and that was different. That was war. I stopped trying to be noticed, stopped waiting for their eyes to land on me and decide I was enough. Instead, I picked up a brush and painted until my hands ached. No words, just color, shape, and silence stretched across canvas. The kind of silence that echoed louder than shouting ever could. Dad once told me, "If your voice trembles, let your hands speak louder." I didn't understand it back then, but now, years later, in a small room above a bakery, I let my hands do all the talking. The painting took me weeks, not because it was detailed, but because it demanded honesty. I called it the Forgotten Room. A girl stood behind a pane of glass, hands pressed flat, her face half erased like someone had tried to wipe her away. The background was soft, washed in grays and pale greens, like a memory you don't want to remember but can't quite forget. No one else was in the frame. That was the point. When the call for submissions went out, I hesitated. It was an open call, anonymous, curated by a local gallery inside the old post office. Exposed brick, creaky floorboards, the smell of dust and old paper tucked into the walls. I didn't expect them to choose it, but a week later, I got the email. Accepted. Installation scheduled for October. I dropped it off in silence. No artist name, just the title and a note taped gently to the frame. For the ones they tried to silence. On opening night, I arrived early. I didn't wear makeup, didn't dress for attention. I stood behind a thick support column near the back, nursing a plastic cup of red wine. It tasted like cherry cough syrup. The room buzzed with polite conversation, the kind that fills spaces without actually saying anything. Then they came in. Diana, Carolyn, Greg, Emily, trailing a few steps behind. Their coats were perfectly tailored. Caroline's heels clicked across the floor like punctuation. They made their rounds slowly, sipping, nodding, murmuring approval. When they reached my painting, they paused. Caroline tilted her head. "This one's a little dramatic, don't you think?" Diana didn't flinch. "These sad little artists, they think silence is a personality." I stayed behind the column, steadying my breath. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. Then the gallery curator stepped up to the mic, a kind man in corduroy, soft-voiced but clear. "Thank you all for being here tonight for our Emerging Voices exhibit. As you know, each piece has been displayed anonymously. It's time now to honor the artists behind the work." He moved down the line, reading names, cueing light applause. When he reached mine, he paused. "This piece is titled The Forgotten Room," he said, "and it was created by Lena Whitmore." The silence that followed wasn't confused. It was heavy. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand. It shattered softly near the back wall. Diana turned first. Her face went pale, lips parted, but no sound came. Caroline's eyes locked onto the painting again, and this time she really looked. Greg didn't move. Emily... She turned too, slowly scanning the crowd. She found me. I stepped out from behind the column. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. They had spent years staring at me without seeing. Now, for the first time, they couldn't look away. I didn't stay for the comments or the compliments. I didn't explain the colors or the message. I just stepped past them, quiet and whole. Later that night, I slipped back into the gallery after the crowd had thinned. Most of the cups had been cleared. The lights were dimmed, but one remained over my painting. Near the guest book, tucked between 2 pages, was a small postcard. No signature. Just 5 words in blue ink. You mattered. Even when I said nothing. I didn't need to guess who left it. For once, the room didn't swallow me. It stared back. Their silence used to feel like fire, hot, swallowing, all-consuming. Now it echoes behind me like the sound of a door that's already closed. I hear it, sure, but I don't turn around. The art room at the community center smells like chalk dust and acrylic paint. There's a hum to the space. Kids whispering, brushes tapping the rims of plastic cups. It's not loud, but it's alive. I stand at the back counter, watching as Riley presses dark crayon strokes across her page. She's 7, maybe 8. Always picks the seat nearest the wall. Today she draws a small, boxy kitchen with a refrigerator tucked into the corner. Behind it, barely visible, a crooked figure in black. "That's me," she says when I crouch beside her. Her voice is soft, like she's already learned to apologize for it. "Hiding?" I ask gently. She nods without looking up. I reach for the yellow, not bright but warm. I hold it out. "What would it look like," I ask, "if you stepped out?" Riley thinks for a long time, then dips her brush into the paint and drags a thick line of gold across the page, behind the fridge, over the figure, and out into the open space. It's clumsy and perfect. That night, after the room is quiet and the brushes are washed, I stay behind. The kiln clicks as it cools, metal shifting like breath settling into sleep. I pull out the small sculpture I've been working on for weeks, a phoenix, one wing cracked along the edge. I don't try to smooth it. I glaze it in ash, let the break stay visible. The next morning, I place it beside the forgotten room in the gallery's permanent wing. On the label, I write, "Not everything broken stays broken." I don't sign it. A few days later, a small envelope appears in the center's mail tray. No return address. Inside, a pressed willow leaf, delicate and green-tinged at the tips, and a note, handwritten in steady, slanted script. "You were never hard to see. They just refuse to look." I sit with the letter for a while, then fold it carefully, place it in the top drawer of my desk, not as a secret, but as something complete. Emily stops by sometimes. She never says much, but last week we received a shipment of new paintbrushes, top shelf quality, all sizes. No receipt, no sender name, just a small tag that read, "For the ones still learning how to speak." Some wounds stop bleeding before they close. Some never needed stitches, just air, time, and something kind. I never spoke to my mother again, or Caroline, or Greg. Not out of spite, just because I'd already said everything I needed to without a single word. There was a time when their silence made me question if I was ever real. Now it's just background noise to a life I've built with my own hands, one brushstroke, one child's smile at a time. Sometimes, the ones who turn away the fastest are the ones who taught us how to stand still and still stand. We don't get to choose the families we're born into, but we can choose the stories we carry forward. If this story has touched something in you, I'd be honored to hear how. Let's keep sharing, because sometimes the quietest stories carry the strongest truths.